the worst racism that I have ever experienced in living with people in a house. Like, it's different when you face racism out in the street, or as if she was opening for a, not even like, I won't even say a dog, because people treat their dogs very nicely. Like, for a monster, for an intruder, she would act like she was opening the door for an intruder, and then I'd get in and she would bang the door, and I used to feel so horrible. Like, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Kudzie Mapiye, and on this channel I do videos about my life living here in Australia, and I also share different life lessons that I've learned along the way. And today I'm going to be talking about some experiences that I've had as a student, as an international student in Australia, living with people from different cultures. So this video is for anyone who is planning to come to study to Australia, or anyone who has studied in Australia or is just curious to know like the accommodation setups that are available and stuff like that. So I'll just share my experience and my story. So I came to Australia as an international student, and as an international student, the first accommodation that I stayed at was a dedicated university accommodation. Like, it had mainly university students. It was off campus, but it was for uni students, and you would have your own room, own bathroom, and you would share the kitchen and the lounge area, like the common areas. So that was the first place that I stayed in when I first came to Australia. And it was a very beautiful place, very convenient, like anything. It was everything you would ever want in accommodation. And so after my lease in that particular place had expired, I decided to go and stay somewhere else, because I wanted something a little bit cheaper, because where I was staying at that particular residence, it was quite expensive. So I wanted to explore other options, see if I could save a little bit of money. So after I moved into that designated university accommodation, I went to look for a share house. Now, if you haven't been to Australia or understand like the different accommodation setups in Australia, there's what they call share houses. And in a share house, you have basically a full house with just the normal setup of a full house, and it has different bedrooms. You can have 3, 4, 5 bedrooms, and each person rents a bedroom in that house. And it could be students, it could be other people, working class people, whoever wants that kind of accommodation. So when I moved out of my student accommodation, I went into a share house, and in that share house, it had 4 bedrooms. Each person had a bedroom, and I had a bedroom. I had my own bedroom and my own bathroom, and we would share the lounge, the kitchen, just like a normal house. And guys, I wish someone had prepared me, because while I was staying at the other student accommodation, I think because there was a lot of governance, it was dedicated student accommodation. So there was a lot of support, like the front office. The people were always available. There was there were really strict rules, people you could bring into the accommodation, all that kind of stuff. And I think because it was more governed, there were less, I don't know, things that used to happen in there, like uncomfortable or those kind of things. But in a share house, this is literally just someone's house that they've decided to let out to students or whoever needs it. So I walked into this kind of setup, and when I was there at that time, they had a couple who was staying in the downstairs. It was a double-story house, and upstairs there were 4 bedrooms. Downstairs there was a little kind of a self-contained apartment. There was a little kitchen, a bathroom, a little lounge, and a bedroom, and a family stayed there. And I was staying upstairs, where there were 4 other bedrooms, and the landlord had one of the bedrooms. I had one of the bedrooms, and there were two other girls who were students who were renting out the other two bedrooms. Now, when my landlord was there, everything was fine. Like, you know, it's not like we used to really get along with these other two housemates that I had. We would just go about doing our business. We didn't talk much because they were actually studying English. So they were not originally from Australia. They're from another country, and there were students studying English. So we didn't really have a lot of conversation because they were not fluent in English and I wasn't fluent in their language. So yeah, that was the situation. So what happened is my landlord used to run a business, and her business required her to travel overseas. And one time she's like, okay, the first time she's traveled overseas, that's when all hell broke loose in that house. She's like, okay, I'm going to be overseas for a few weeks. I'm going to leave you guys in the house and, you know, just do your thing and I'll be back in a few weeks. We're like, oh, good. And so she left. Before she left, that's when the red flags started to pop up from everywhere. So before she left, she had like a dinner that she prepared. So she prepared this dinner and she asked all the housemates to, like, it was a share meal, like you know, where you bring all the food on the table and people just serve themselves. That was the setup. And so she made that and she invited the people in the house to come and have to share the food. So this was the first time for me to be at the same table with my housemates, like, because we would cook our own meals and stuff like that. So this was the first time that we're actually seated at the table eating together. And I noticed that, you know, they didn't seem very comfortable that I was there sitting at the table with them. And they kept conversing in, you know, their own language that I couldn't understand. But you know, when people are talking and you know they're talking about you, like you don't understand their language, but you can just tell the body language. They say something and then they kind of look at you and you're just like, it looks like they're talking about me. That was the situation. Like, and my landlord was actually from the same country as these other housemates. So, you know, I could tell that, you know, you can tell people's reactions, and she was quite nice and, you know, you can tell she was a little bit uncomfortable. And I was just like, I didn't enjoy the meal. Like, the food was good, but I didn't enjoy the vibe. I felt very uncomfortable, very unwelcomed at that table. And anyway, after that meal, the landlord left to go overseas with her business. And it was in the house. So the other people downstairs, like, we rarely ever saw them. They had their own entrance, like, rarely ever saw them. It was mostly the people upstairs that I would see. So with this housemates, each person had a key to the house, and we would, you know, go in and out as we pleased. But there was also inside the house, there was, you know, where you can lock the house, where there's like that little chain that you can lock from inside. And you can open the door just a little bit with the chain, and then you can see who's outside and you can close it. They had that kind of thing inside the door. But of course, you could only use that when you were inside the house. Now, I tell you that because this is what my racist housemate used as a weapon of mass destruction towards me. Like, that was her main weapon of demonstrating her racism and intolerance of me as a Black woman in that house. So I don't think these people had ever had many interactions with Black people in their country. So it was a bit of a culture shock to them to come in Australia and then have to live with Black people in the same house. That's the feeling that I got from the experience that I had from these people. So once my landlord left, these two girls just unleashed the worst racism that I have ever experienced in living with people in a house. Like, it's different when you face racism out in the street or at work or whatever, and then you come to the refuge of your own home and you can kind of just switch off and relax in your own house. But when the racism is happening in your own house, like, there is nowhere to escape. Like it's in your house. That's your safe space. And that's what I experienced. So what this girl would do is when the landlord left, we would go to uni, like we would take the bus to go to uni. And if she gets off, like if she gets home before me, she would come and lock the door from the inside with that little chain thing. So that meant that even with my key, I couldn't get inside the house. So that's what she would do. So sometimes we'd even get off the bus, like sometimes the same bus, and she would bolt to rush so that she gets to the house before me so she can get inside the house and lock me out. Can you imagine? So I would have to then go, and this was started happening when my landlord was overseas. So she would come lock me out, and then I would come, unlock the door with my key, but still couldn't get into the house because it's locked from inside. I would bang at the door, knock my life away, just knocking on the door. And this girl would take her sweet time. Like she would make me sit outside and then take her sweet time and she would be like, what is it? Like, she would open the door with that little thing so that she could just see what's on. She's like, yeah. And I'm like, can you please, like, I had to humble myself. So she would open the door for me. I'm like, can you please open the door for me? And she would open it like very rudely. And, like as if she was opening for not even like, I won't even say a dog because people treat their dogs very nicely. Like for a monster, for an intruder, she would act like she was opening the door for an intruder. And then I'd get in and she would bang the door. And I used to feel so horrible. Like I would feel like, oh my gosh, if I ever had any like time that I wanted to go back home, like to Zimbabwe, that was the time when I was living in that house of horror. Like it was literally like a torture chamber that I was living in. And then that's one of the things she used to do. And the other thing that this girl used to do, and it was two of them, like they would do it together. And even the whole locking of the door thing, I think they used to communicate like, that when she's not there, like if we come home before her, make sure you lock the door so she can bang the door and we can leave her outside for a long time. Anyway, the other thing that these girls would do is they would, when I was in the kitchen, because we would make our meals separately, we all had space in the fridge where we would store our food, and I would make my own meals. And so, when I'm making my dinner and I'm chopping my onions and, chopping my things so I can make my dinner, she would storm into the kitchen and say, and yell, like, stop making noise, like, "Ugh." And I'm like, I am chopping onions. How is that making noise? I am not no sound is coming from my mouth. I am literally just chopping onions, but she would come and say that it's disturbing her and that she can't study for her test because I am disturbing her peace with my onions, which was so ridiculous. And for me, I am not really a mean-spirited person. So having to experience this, it was so confusing to me and so bizarre that someone can be so mean to another human being just because of the color of their skin. Like I was so confused. I was so unhappy in that house. Like I couldn't wait. And I thank God that I only signed like a very short lease. It was just a couple of months that I was in that house. And when my lease was finished, like I left, never to return. So yeah, that was one of the things, like the whole, like she would say that I'm making noise when I'm chopping onions, and then I would cook my dinner. And then, when I'm cleaning my dishes, when you have the water running, she would storm into the kitchen again and start yelling that, my pots and cups and whatever are making noise and she can't study. How ridiculous. So yeah, that's how I used to live with these people in the house up until my landlord came. And the other thing that they would do is, because the bedrooms were like in the corridor close to each other. So they would have their doors open, talking to each other in their language. And if I walk past, like, they would like just yell, like, you know when people are in conversation in their language, you don't understand what they're saying, but they're talking in a certain tone, like it sounds like, yeah, these people are in conversation. You would walk past, like I would walk past going to my room, and they would just yell something random, and I would know that this is not part of the conversation. This is some kind of insult in their language directed towards me. And yeah, so that's what they used to do when I would walk through the corridor and they had their doors open, which was so uncomfortable for me. And because these girls were not fluent in English, I couldn't even address anything with them because they had convenient, what can I say, selective English that they would choose when to understand and when not to understand what I was saying. You know what I mean? If I tried to say something, they're like, oh, I don't understand. So it was like I couldn't even address anything with them. It was such an uncomfortable situation. And I left that house, thank goodness. And yeah, and when the landlord came back, like, because they were from the same country, I now didn't know whether they were in on this together, like, because they would always talk in the same language. So I really felt like I wasn't even comfortable raising stuff with her because I didn't know whether she was part of the whole thing. So yeah, the only choice I had was to just move out of that place and find somewhere else. And when I did move out, I went and, stayed somewhere that was a lot more peaceful with very, very nice people. And yeah, so what I just wanted to tell anyone who might be coming to Australia to study or even to just live or work or whatever, just be very careful, like where you choose to stay. Make sure that when you choose, if you do choose to stay in a share house, which I do not recommend, if you do choose to stay in a share house, just make sure that you get a feel of the other people in the house and their vibe before you decide to move in, because you could be signing yourself up for a year or a few months of horror, like if they're not people who are used to staying with Black people or stuff like that. So just be very careful where you stay, and it's worth it to just spend more money on accommodation and have somewhere more private that you can share your space just by yourself, or with other close friends, or with people that you get along with, that are not racist or stuff like that. Because the worst thing you want to do is to stay in a house that is racist, because that way you have nowhere to escape and you're experiencing racism every single day. So that's my experience of staying with racist housemates, and I was really, really scarred, about the whole student accommodation thing. It was a major culture shock for me, firstly just staying in a house with other people that I don't know, and then having to experience racism on top of that was very, very uncomfortable. So I would never want anyone to go through that. So please, if you are planning to come to Australia to share accommodation, make sure it's with people you at least are familiar with, and don't just sign a lease with people you don't know. There are some very nice people out there. Like after that experience, I stayed with some really, really good people, but it was a bit I just didn't know what I was walking into, and it was taking a risk every time. And I risked walking into a similar situation, which thank goodness I didn't, except for one other time where I stayed in a house and there was another racist person, and they were from another country as well, surprisingly or not surprisingly, and we got robbed, and we had intruders come into that house and they stole from everyone, including me. They stole from me as well. But with this particular girl, when she came to the house, the first thing she did was to say, questioning me where I was, as if I was the one who had organized this whole robbery, because I was Black and Black people steal apparently. But yeah, that was the only other racist experience that I had after that house, with this other lady who was not very tolerant of Black people. But yeah, that is something that could happen in Australia when you're living with other people. So just do be careful, stay with people that and make sure that people are nice and tolerant people, because Australia is such a multicultural country, and they have people from all over the world, and people who come from other countries that are very racist, some people who come from other countries that are very inclusive. So you really get a big mix of people. Be careful who you interact with. Make sure that you're staying with people who are nice, who are tolerant, and all that. So yeah, that's my experience staying with racist housemates, an experience that I would never ever want to have again or wish upon anybody. So yeah, be careful when you're choosing accommodation. Make sure you know the people. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share with you guys. If you have any questions, please write in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.